more primitive or less than other groups of people. And so this find are recreations of the same find about 100 years apart. And this is La Chapelle 1. Uh, and it is a recreation in, God, I want to say the 1950s, maybe a little bit older than that, um, versus a recreation in 2020 something. The early recreation was maybe it's like right around the turn of the century, even 1909 when La Chapelle one was found. But this is a really good example of how early archaeology and anthropology created our images of Neanderthals as being very brutish in this idea that by doing so they could double down on the racism that they were trying to kind of espouse with their field. And so this is a really great representation. Ekla, no, I haven't heard that one yet. It hasn't come across my feed. Sorry, I have to twist around to get to it. Um, as in come up and speak which? Akie, no. Uh, I haven't seen anything about that. But there's a lot of new pre-contact DNA stuff that's coming out. Questions about clarity about Neanderthals? Puerto Rico. I haven't seen that, Akila. I'd love to look deeper into it though. So I'm going to see what I can find on can you tell me what it was that they were looking at? Like they say the DNA says this, right? Um, thank you, Akila. There you go, I think.
Hi, Widda.
Hey, what's up?
I just had a question because I have come to the understanding that we used to think that we unalived all the other hominids. And my current understanding is that we interbred with other hominids, and that's why there aren't other hominids left on our branch. And I just wanted a little clarity about like the transitional qualities of the Homo like of the hominid group and like what our relationship was to those different groups.
So, in the understanding that most of our relationships are what we understand for now and that they can change tomorrow. What I think is the current understanding is that Homo habilis comes before Homo erectus. We don't think that they might be direct descendant, but we're not sure. And Homo habilis kind of it morphs into them, kind of evolves into them basically, is our thought process. To my understanding, there's a couple other groups that come around this time too, that are Homo groups. And then Homo erectus itself become, and those groups die out, and their Homo erectus itself becomes several different what we call subspecies. So like Heidelbergensis or Gaster, Rudolfensis, and all of these are kind of like different what we call subspecies. Some people will call them different species, but they're often found together. Now, if we're all living together in bands, then that makes sense. But we haven't been able to DNA test them. It's just different skull morphology, so we're not for sure. So our thought is that, and I've heard some people even go Erectus to ergaster to Heidelbergensis to Neanderthal, Erectus to ergaster to Heidelbergensis to Sapien, Erectus to ergaster to Florensis. Um, and we're not sure yet with Heidelberg or with Denisovian, but very likely Heidelbergensis. Um, and I don't know what we think with Naladi because Naladi is found around the same time we are in a Homo erectus heavy area, but a Homo heidelbergensis heavy area. So heidelbergensis and Homo erectus, these people are all like living together. And so I'm not sure where we think Naladi comes from. But us, we believe that our semi-adjustable line of descent comes Habilis erectus, ergaster, Heidelbergensis, sapien. And then we were able to mix and breed with those other groups. And those other groups, if we have their DNA within us, are able to be carried on within us. But mainly died out, it seems, due to different evolutionary, things like either not having enough genetic diversity or their environment no longer being suitable or things like that. Um, and so our relationship with them is more of a cousin relationship. Does that go over all of it?
I mean, that helps a little bit, yeah. What I wanted to clarify is so when we understand species on a bio one level, on like a biology one level, we understand it that there is clear distinctions. And my understanding was that interbreeding was a major like that's like the ability to interbreed is a denotion that we share more in that species than less. So
Yes.
I'm just trying to like clarify that because my understanding of like evolutionary biology and like the stronger biology stuff is that species is not as useful as it is in bio one.
That makes a lot of sense, absolutely. And I've been informed before that many times we define different species, and species is something that we use loosely too, right? Like even within archaeology, anthropology, species, I use it a lot, but really it is a loose term. I just use it because I'm trying, like we're all one species, right? Like I want to get that clear. But so species is often defined as two different groups that can't interbreed, right? Two separate species. My understanding it is the fact that because we share such a close common ancestor in Heidelbergensis, is why we're capable of interbreeding with them, and they're more of a cousin than anything else. Um,
Okay.
and that we often were actually in bands where, and this is a little bit later information, like we get this from like Denisova cave, seeing that that we have both Neanderthal and Sapien and Denisovian in Denisova, or all three of them in Denisova cave. We start to get this picture that all of these were groups of people that may have been more band than tribal, meaning that they're not all the same family group all the time. Sometimes they're more of a different family groups together in one community, which is what we consider band versus tribal, which is all the same family group. Um, and so those that gene flow would have been a lot looser than I think we think of. And another thing that they're learning very recently is that we ourselves didn't come from one singular population of Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus in South Africa. that it looks like it's actually more of like, and the terminology that I use is just for visualization, but like a nation of many different bands who would meet a few times a year or once a year, or trade their genetics. And so instead of coming from a group of maybe 300 Heidelbergensis, we come from a group of maybe, or a nation of maybe, uh, a few thousand different people that are maybe 200, 300 different groups that are all kind of just floating back and forth together. And so that's very possible what happens with us and Neanderthals and Denisovians too, is that it becomes this kind of floating together groups that kind of just blend on some levels. Does that make sense?
That helps a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it does. I mean, I've just like I've been on it a long time, and I was under the what I thought was a conservative impression that about 200,000 years is how long Homo sapiens sapiens have been themselves. But also, they did find some more recent evidence recently about the use of fire originating before Homo sapiens sapiens, and like tool use and fire and stuff like that. Well, like in the 50s and before I was born, we considered those,
Us.
um, we considered those differently.
Yeah.
And now we look at it from a different lens. And I just wonder, does that mean that they were humans?
Yeah. They were.
If they
Absolutely.
weren't Homo sapiens, were they? So they were humans, even if they weren't sapiens
Yes.
sapiens.
Because homo means human. So anybody who's under the genus of homo, any species, sapien is a so on the taxonomy, right?
Right.
Sapien is the species and the genus is Homo. And Neanderthal is the species and the genus is Homo. Erectus is the species and the genus is Homo. Homo as a genus literally means human. So all of these are actual human. And
Uh-huh.
many of their behaviors and traits are what we think of as very human, and is actually these things that we actually, um, the reasons that we identify them as a homo species and as human is because of the human traits that they share with us, the things that we identify as being human, right? So
Right.
habilis is identified as being our first homo, our first human, because it's our first tool maker, right? And so that means it's the first that shows that sign of, well, that science, right? That understanding of creation, right? And the understanding of creating a tool that's longer term, because we do have other tools in the animals realm, right? Um, and then we see that erectus is actually, now we understand, our first to find fire, and our first to use it to cook, and our first to use it for hunting, like spear making and stuff like that. Um, and that for a couple 100,000 years, they didn't do anything other than the Acheulean hand axes. But once the other species start to come along, so they're still around until about 170,000 years ago. And recently we've realized that we've been here for 300,000 years. So
Give or take.
yeah, give or take, but like they've pushed it back. The latest find that they've found, they've dated at 300,000 years. So, or the latest earliest Homo sapien that they found is at 300,000 years. So it's 300,000 plus years. Now, in the give or take that can go down, what they're talking about with like radiocarbon dating is generally a couple of 100 years. So it's not like we're looking at, you know, 290,000. We might be looking at 298,000, right? Um, so, we're looking at that time frame for us, but that also means that we spent more time with all of these groups, right? We've also pushed back Neanderthal to 600,000 years instead of 500,000 years, which is what they were before. And so when we're looking at these two things and we're pushing these all back, our intermixing with Homo erectus and all these other Homo species is over a longer period of time.
Right. Like what was it? Origins. I saw Origins on PBS, and they talked about how there is some Homo sapien DNA from almost 1 million years ago in Guinea, no, or Ghana, maybe somewhere in West Africa, they found like some DNA, and maybe that's just totally inaccurate. That was just my understanding.
So I went searching for the oldest DNA on the scientific journals to try and see what the oldest DNA that we have. When we found that million-year-old Neanderthal, not Neanderthal, sorry, Mastodon DNA a while ago, we got like a full genome sequence from a mastodon in a million years ago, and that was our oldest that we had at the time. And everything else that we had before that, to my understanding, we don't really have anything, especially within us, going back more than like, I think even our oldest Neanderthal DNA is less than 100,000 years old. I could be wrong. It could be pushed back a little bit, but not by a whole lot. And then I know that we haven't gotten any DNA from any other species but us and Neanderthals and Denisovians. And I know that they've recently had a discovery of 2 million-year-old DNA in an Arctic region, right, where they did that whole biome thing where they were testing the soil. Um, but my understanding is that we don't have any I've never I haven't seen anything that shows any evidence of us being before the 300,000 years. I do know that, things like we now know that the white skin alleles develop about 900,000 years ago. And so a lot of times we kind of think of that as, well, that must be Homo sapien, right? But it's not, it's really within Erectus. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. I'd have to take a look. Are you talking ancient like the show?
No, it was a series called Origins. I think it was just called Origins on PBS.
Okay, I'll take a look and
Uh,
see what it's talking about. It could be, I mean, so I mean, it could be anything from actually finding like Homo sapien DNA genome, right? Or it could be we find the earliest traces of Homo DNA dating back here. And it's been thought that, or the earliest traces of what would eventually become our genome. I don't know. I'll take a look and see what it's saying on it.
I think that is what it was. It wasn't like they found Homo sapien sapien from then. It's that they found genetic evidence.
Okay, yeah, and well, and that would make sense. Um, that to me would be something within Erectus that they're finding, which might be evidence of Erectus DNA even. But or another thing that it could be is sometimes they'll take DNA that they see and they'll like scale the DNA and or not scale it, but kind of like decide the generations within that DNA to go back to a mitochondrial loop within that DNA. And when they're looking at the generations to go back to the mitochondrial loop, they'll age it based on that too. So that might be it. But I can take a look and see what it is. But I hadn't heard about something like that.
What
I'll have
about
to take a look.
mitochondrial Eve? Is that confirmed? Is that something that is like settled?
So mitochondrial Eves are just the origin of a mitochondrial DNA line. So like currently we have several mitochondrial Eves. Um, so the X1 mitochondrial DNA is a Turtle Island DNA. So L is in Africa, and then out of Africa we go M and N and O. And as we leave, so L's daughters, say L has several daughters, and some of them are L, well, they're all L, but as they leave, say two daughters go together and their mitochondrial DNA in their so when a man and a woman are together and a daughter is born, I get an X from my father and an X from my mother, right? So my father's X comes from my mother. So when that X blends, it kind of creates a new mitochondrial in itself. So if that new mitochondrial takes over, then I become the Eve of the next line. I have mothers behind me, and the other branches might have eaves to them too. That's really kind of a rough way of explaining it. It's a little difficult, but basically we have several mitochondrial eaves that we know they're just the origins of certain branches of mitochondrial DNA. We do all trace back to a singular, ancestor, and basically I think that what it is Like Neanderthal, Heidelbergensis would have known grandchild's name was Neanderthal. Grandpa Heidelbergensis and grandchild Neanderthal wouldn't have known each other as different species, right? So that mitochondrial Eve would not have known herself as a unique species. Um, but it is her genetics that pass on into all of us. Um, so that's how it kind of traces back with the mitochondrial Eve. It's really just how far back you can trace a mitochondrial line and when it stops, basically. What's the earliest of that mitochondrial line, maybe is the best way.
Yeah. So another question I had just about, and then I'll drop out. But like, so in that 300,000 years that we're talking about, right? In the context of our current understanding and our current society, right? We go back maybe 25,000 years, so like to the like beginnings of agricultural practice as we know it. Uh, give or take, right? 20,000, 18,000 years, something
10,
like that.
10,
10
yeah,
for agriculture?
for agriculture. Um, as we know it, 10 or less.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
that's
think that our earliest evidence is so, and I was just looking at this for something I'm working on. But our earliest evidences of actual corn and or not corn, wheat and barley are along the Nile at like 15,000 years ago, but they're not agricultural practices like we have agriculture, like Western agricultural practices. They're not tilling ground, right? They're tending. They're gathering and tending, um, and guiding so that they can get that next generation that's larger.
okay.
Um,
So within that pocket, so you said 15,000 years. I'm going to be like aggressive and say 15 to 20,000. But in a 300,000 year timeline, it seems possible to me that full societies and full stuff could exist in the margins that we have no evidence of.
Absolutely,
Like,
absolutely.
but like fully evolved, like technology,
Oh,
no,
absolutely. And
we
this is
have
why,
evidence.
and this is why. So first of all, I'm going to go aggressive myself and I'm going to say 10 to 15. And the reason I'm going to go aggressive that way is because I want to double down on this thought process is only a few thousand years old. This is not who we are. And the reason I want to double down on that is because I do believe that we had all of those advanced, what we would think of as advanced societies, but those societies don't leave anything behind because in being more connected than us, in being more in harmony with the world around them and more animistic and less greedy, they don't have that need to actually leave an indelible mark for the next generation to see. Instead, they're living in more concert with the world around them. And when you live in more concert with the world around you and you're not trying to leave a lasting monument so that everybody knows your dick size 3,000 years from now, um, when you do that, you disappear into the record. You leave nothing behind, right? We believe that Homo erectus uses tools. Homo erectus has clothing. We know Homo erectus crossed water. None of this stuff is in the archaeological record. We know they use, well, we know they use tools other than stone. We know that they use tools other than stone because they wouldn't have been able to use the stone tools that they made to hunt. Okay. So they had to have used other tools besides the fact that we use simple tools all the time with leaves and like a plate of wood and stuff like that, right? So we know that they would have had to use those tools, and we know that those things wouldn't last in the record to show up. We know that they had to use clothing because of body lice. And the development of body lice goes back so far, and it has to have clothing to develop, right? And so we believe that they had clothing, but we can't find anything within the archaeological record that shows actual clothing. We just know it because of body lice and because of how old we know body lice is and how we know that body lice developed from another strain of body lice. And now we know that this has to go back several hundreds of thousands of years to get to that point, right? Um, and we know that they cross water because they had species that developed from them in Indonesia, which was never above sea level or never somewhere that you could get to without crossing water in the islands in the Philippines. More recent evidence showing Turtle Island in Australia that Homo erectus made it to both of those places. All of these things are crossing water, and so we know that they crossed water, but we're never going to find their boats because they're wood or maybe hide, and that stuff doesn't last for 170,000 years, right? So to
Well, I
my
appreciate that, but I meant more like high, like
but that's what I'm
computer.
talking about. And that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. So what we view, so we could make phones that are biodegradable right now. We have the technology. And if I could make a phone that was biodegradable, because we have new battery technology that's not the lithium that works into other things, plus the fact that if I left metal and lithium and all of this stuff for a million years, it's going to kind of just go back in. Homo erectus 2 million years old, right? And I'm not saying they had cell phones, but what I'm saying is that things kind of go back into the record, anyways. And also, you can create advanced technology that is biodegradable, part of the environment, able to return to the environment instead of leaving an indelible mark. Um, Now, flying cars, cell phones, computers. I mean, maybe, maybe not, right?
You'd think we'd see some evidence. Is all I'm saying of that.
Maybe, maybe not. We see evidence of computers in the ancient Greeks, right?
Right.
Um, we call the Baghdad battery evidence, though I'm not sure if the Baghdad battery is evidence. Um, but I also believe totally and completely. Okay, so even plastic biodegrades after a couple million years, right? You know, even glass becomes sand again after a couple million years, right? Um, so the ability to have these things, and we had vast cities here in Turtle Island that were at the same technological level as Europe. Europe had iron and used iron in industrialization in a different way. But that was because Europe had long been in this idea of leaving an indelible mark, leaving something permanent for generations to come. Whereas Turtle Island's idea was to create a world, a garden for generations to come, right? Um, Europe is like, I want you to see the size of my big obelisk. And Turtle Island's like, I want to make sure that there's food here, right? So with Turtle Island, you see that the Five Nations had advanced culture and cities that blended into the forest. But they're still very advanced, and they're more advanced than Europe at this time, sewage wise, and things like that. So when you look, you can see that you can get all of these things on a level that is part of the biome, right? And if it's on a level that's part of the biome, it disappears in the biome when it's done because it's part of the biome.
That's interesting. I guess my last question, I'll let you go. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Um, when did Kuala Lumpur happen? When was it built?
When what?
Kuala Lumpur. It's like
I'm
Thailand and Cambodia. It's like ancient. It's like
the
ancient
pyramid.
stuff that's been. What?
Are you talking the pyramid or are you talking the wait, Thailand?
No, like India, Thailand, but it's a society that Kuala Lumpur.
Many of those societies in Thailand and stuff like that are okay, so most of the ones that I've seen that they're pulling out of the jungle all seem to be within the last 2 to 3,000 years. I do believe that there's a lot more ancient stuff there, but that's really good evidence because, or a really good example of this because we see that there's lots of places in India and Thailand and stuff like that that are only 1,000 years old but have completely disappeared. And they were made of stone, but they've completely disappeared into the jungle, and you can only find them through topography um, because of how that jungle area is, right? Um, But I do believe that there's older stuff. I don't know the exact one that you're talking about, by the name. I might know it if you typed it out. Oh, there it is. Yeah, no, I can't say that by the Gunung Padang. I think that one is God, I want to say that one's more recent, but I need to go and look to actually like I'd have to look at a website and actually go and see. But a lot of the ones in Thailand are within the last few thousand years, and they've just disappeared. Some of them, literally, some of them are from 1600 year or from the 1600s, and they've disappeared into the forest.
Well,
So
I mean that happened because in the Mayans, like they were around until the conquistadors, and now they're just disappeared.
yeah,
Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I know you like to keep it under control,
this is the
but I
pyramid.
appreciate it.
This is the pyramid. This was on Ancient Aliens, or not Ancient Aliens, but on Ancient Apocalypse. The Gunung Padang. I do believe in that pyramid. I don't believe that it's the Ancient Apocalypse shit that Graham Hancock is pushing. I believe that the ancient Indonesians had the capability to do it themselves. They didn't need some white savior to come in and tell them. Um, but this is 20,000 years old. The problem with this is that the person who is claiming it, the archaeologist who is claiming it won't publish his stuff for peer review. He won't give us the information. Like when you're carbon dating, you have like specific spectrometers and things like that that you run it through, specific labs that you send it to, and you're supposed to tell people what program you used, what spectrometers you used, what labs you sent it to so that they can replicate it so that they can get the same answers that you got, right? For that retestability, right? Um, and they're not publishing that. They're not giving that to their peers. They're not allowing peer review to test it. That's my only problem with the Gunung Padang is because that archaeologist he published what looks like a pamphlet and I mean, like, it had a blip on it like this. It wasn't even like it didn't even say carbon 14 dating, putting it this by this date or, like the backup of it. It didn't even give any of that. And so that's my only problem with that one. But I do believe it's possible. Absolutely. I think the Indonesians could have done that 100%. That would not surprise me. And to me, that follows into that thought process that, yes, I think it's all out there. I think we've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. I think it disappeared when we were told we couldn't be scientists anymore because God didn't like us questioning him. And I think it did that for everybody. And I think that we had higher points and then lower points and higher points and then lower points. Um, I think that we were getting to I mean, we had surgeries, we had amputations and stuff like that, right? And better surgeries that we have today in ancient Egypt, right?
Like Japan.
Well, and their hip and knee replacements are prettier than our hip and knee replacements. And that foot amputation at 31,000 years ago that shows that they would have had to have anesthesia. They would have had antiseptic. They would have had to had known to use obsidian because of the fineness of the cut. The girl lived for 9 years. I mean, and that's 31,000 years ago in Indonesia, right? So not in Indonesia, Burma. No, I'm sorry. It starts with a B, and I'm lost for a second, and I can't find it. But we absolutely see that these things absolutely go back. I believe, I believe that we have always lived in greater comfort than we live in now, and less stress than we live in now. Actually, I believe that the industrial revolution creates the starvation that we have. Um, Do I believe that we were always this technologically advanced? No, but I don't believe that that is because of a lack of knowledge. I think that it's a lack of desire to destroy, right? This comes from a lack of care about the world around you and thinking that you can exploit everything. And I think that there are other ways to create this advancement that they just didn't use or that
Well,
we don't
again, thank
use.
you so much.
Absolutely, Borneo, thank you so much, Mia. Absolutely, no problem. Thank you so much. Um, but no, I absolutely fully support the idea that we are absolutely way more advanced, way further back than we want to think. That's why I find things like Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse so frustrating because I think that some of these things are absolutely true, but when you put them forth in a conspiracy theorist Alex Jones type of manner, or you put forth stuff that pushes a racist agenda when you do them, then it really fucks with the possibility of these things actually becoming common knowledge or actually becoming a part of our understanding, right? So. I think time is cyclical too. Um, though I am the person who thinks a thousand different things at the same time and they don't all have to make sense together, right? Like, so I believe that we manifested this when we created consciousness, but I also believe in evolution 100%, right? So, like, it goes a couple different ways. Um, so I think that I think that we live in a very narrow thought process, and I think that when we acknowledge that it's a narrow thought process and start looking at the wider thought process, that we gain quite a bit. For me, that's a big thing, and that's real. Well, and people want to have a scientific conversation about this, but he's not bringing the science to the game, right? And that's where the problem with him lies. Is he claims the science without giving the proof of the science, which you can't do and expect people to hear you. And and because he's using racism. I mean, there's a lot of people within the archaeological and anthropological community, I'm going to tell you, are probably ignoring him strictly because he is using this racist thought process that somebody else teach them, right? Who in Indonesia is going to support the idea that they had to be taught by some master race from Antarctica, which means you know them motherfuckers pale as shit, to actually be able to build a pyramid. And it's not even a pyramid that looks like any other pyramids, right? It's a round pyramid. It's only a pyramid because it goes up. It's only a pyramid because it reaches, a narrow point at the top. That's the only reason it's a pyramid. It's an oval, right? Hey, Africandre. You know, I have to say it 10 different ways till I find my favorite way. Yeah. Well, and that's the problem. I mean, some of these things are really cool and really true, probably, but when you couch it all in the idea that it took somebody else to teach them that, right? When you couch it all in that idea, awesome. I love kitty cats. When you couch it all in the idea that it was some master race, many anthropologists and archaeologists today are working to overthrow race theory, right? Are working to prove that race theory has been debunked. If we're so busy working to prove race theory has been debunked, why the fuck are we going to enter some magical master race that taught everybody anything, right? Like, ain't nobody going to buy down on that because we know that that just takes us back where we were. We know that that just takes us back where we were in the 1850s when our field creates this. Like, so now let's acknowledge that there's a master race in Antarctica that taught everybody everything, or Atlantis that taught everybody everything. So now we've acknowledged that nobody had the intelligence to do it on their own, right? Now we decide that humans weren't smart enough. They needed somebody to teach them because it's not like we hadn't gone through 2 million years of evolution and hadn't had fire for 1.5 million of that and, hadn't been putting stones together for like 2.5 million years at this point. Like, we definitely needed some outside group to come in and show us how to do it, right? That's it. Well, and Africandre is what it sounds like to me and what I see it as most of the time, but sometimes I stumble over it, I think is what it is. Hi, Rosie, it's good to see you. And so I think for me, that's the really important parts about that. I do think that we were absolutely 6,000 years ago really isn't that long ago. You're correct. So the pyramid I'm talking about was the one that they're talking about in Indonesia that they think is about 20,000 years old. If we can get the evidence, like if they can give us the actual, this is it, right? So that one's a little bit older. Um, but 6,000 years isn't old, you know. 10,000 years isn't old. 20,000 years isn't old. If we're here for 300,000, that's nothing, right? If you lived to 300, what's 20? Is that the right or is that the right? They're the same dude, actually. These are two different recreations. So this dude is the one that was made of La Chapelle one of our early Neanderthals. Um, this is the reason that I'm using this image, and what I really like is this is two recreations about 100 years apart of the same find, and this really shows the racism in the early finds, right, and in the early archaeology and anthropology, and how they used the early finds and the recreations of the early finds to double down on that race theory idea, right? Um, and then 100 years later, we're seeing how our current understanding and our oh, it's very racist. It's as racist as it gets. This one here is why when people come in here and I've got a picture of Homo erectus as a black person behind me and they go, "You're being racist," and everybody's going, "There's nothing racist about that. What's racist about that?" I'm like, actually, I get what you're saying. The reason that you think I'm being racist is because literally this picture right here, this is the picture why everybody says that's racist. This picture. And this picture is racist as fuck. Because what this picture does is this picture says that Neanderthals, being a primitive human, um, looked like people that they decided looked like people from darker countries, right? They put a lot of idea into certain groups in Africa are heavier in mid-phase prognosis, maybe. Um, and so they pushed the mid-phase prognosis way further than it was. They took the skin extremely dark. They made it very hairy and hunched. And they actually like really hunched him. They took what was actually osteoarthritis and created a hunched body out of him. And they made him very brutish. And they associated all of this with being backwards or primitive and made it about being dark, right? Made it about having these features that they decided were associated with it, right? And so it became a very racist thing, racist bad thing. And that's why I like this picture because it shows how racist this is when we can see that this is the modern day reconstruction, the modern day understanding of what La Chapelle 1 would have been. La Chapelle 1 was old, probably older than 60. And La Chapelle 1 was pretty crippled, like from age. He had some bone issues, um, all doing with like osteoarthritis, degenerative joint disease, and a couple of other things. And actually, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight because we're going to do medicine with Neanderthals, which is where we were going. Um, I did see an open up on the Atunwa Inaru skull. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that to get more information for the person that was asking about it. So I'm going to have that later for you, which is a Tiano skull, Tano skull. Lived 500 years before Columbus set foot on Dominican soil. Awesome. Okay, so Um, to my understanding, it was a long life. So let's go over first. We can start with La Chapelle, actually. Um, on the website, the inwiddaord.com website, under this week, you will find a bunch of different website links. I linked the websites instead of the pictures so that you can get a little bit more information on them. But what you're going to find under La Chapelle is new versus old, and that's this. And it goes into that, and it goes into what we were just talking about. You also see like a recreation in situ. I put another one up here before, and it apparently did not save when I published it, and I apologize for that. So I've got to find it and put it back up. Um, but what we're seeing is that he has almost all of his teeth are gone. So we would have had to have help eating. Um, dang, I wanted that one and I do not have it. Where did it go? Let me find it because it actually has a list of the injuries. I have one that actually has a list of his injuries, and I have to figure out where I put it because I did just have it. But we do believe that he needed help throughout life, but not. He was just an old man, and just needed care more in his old age. There is some stuff that shows that he probably needed care a little bit earlier, but not really, really early. I hate when I do that. Uh, Inflammation in his ear canal, meaning a loss of hearing, degeneration in the jaw and loss of all the teeth, osteoarthritis in his shoulder, osteoarthritic degeneration of the neck, and a damaged hip joint and a healed injury, rib fracture. So this site gives his age as being younger than the other site that I was looking at earlier. But that is a list of injuries. He is one of our evidences of medicine within Neanderthal. And what I really like with him is that because La Chapelle is actually found just a little bit later. No, a little bit earlier than Shanidar. They actually have a picture with Shanidar of Shenandoah one or of La Chapelle in his grave. They were able to take like a picture and they did a recreation of it. And so you can see him sitting in his grave. You can see bones of animals around him in his grave. And that's up there as well. But when we look at the different injuries and the different morphologies within the injuries, we're seeing that he's definitely somebody that's receiving a lot of medical care. He's going to need help with he's going to need help with not having the proper teeth. Oh, I hate what is going on with this today? Sorry, my computer is being really weird. There it is. Okay. With the osteoarthritis, especially within the neck, we're looking at the likelihood that he's going to need pain help, right? As well as just care, right? Healed rib fracture. You can heal a rib fracture on its own, but you do have to make sure that you are, kind of making sure you're staying still or a little bit less work for a hot minute. Same thing with the damaged hip joint, except you're going to have to be completely still on that. It's not like you need to be bandaged up, but you probably have to be completely still for a hot minute. Um, but this mainly shows evidence of living through injuries in old age. When we look at Shanidar 1, which is Kreb from the Earth's Children series, what we're seeing is a lot deeper. What we see with him is that he has a blow that damages a blow to the left side of his head that damages his left eye and the brain area controlling the right side of the body, which leads to a withered right arm and possible partial paralysis that cripples his right leg. On his middle foot bones on his right foot, there's a healed fracture. Um, and we show that all of these show signs of healing. We also show that his right forearm is amputated off. Oh, browser history is a good idea. We also see that his right forearm is amputated. This would be after the withering, um, because that withering would have caused damage and the need to, sorry, and the need to, that withering and that damage, once it gets so bad, it starts disintegrating. It will start eating itself. So you have to get rid of it. Browser history is not my best thing, especially when I've been researching genocides all day long. Ha ha ha. I think that's it. Maybe. There it is. Found it. There's also vertebral brucellosis infection, which is a pathological lesions and erosions on the bone. That is a brucellosis, and I believe that this. I need to double check what brucellosis was. It had to do. It includes joint pain, muscle pain, fever, weight loss, and fatigue. It's treated with antibiotics, but of course they're not having antibiotics, right? Did I say that word? Please tell me I didn't say that word pretty, because if I did, I need to apologize. Or if you're talking about something else, you might be talking completely about something else. Okay, sorry. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't say that word. I don't want to. Um, so okay, cool. So it shows that he has several diseases on La Chapelle 1. We also see with Shanidar that we're seeing several disease processes. He definitely needed care, and definitely, I mean, we're looking at healed fractures, we're looking at an amputation of an arm. La Chapelle was death. We see that Shanidar 1 is death, Shanidar 1 is partially blind. Um, and we're seeing that within both of these, there's this care of elderly as well. We also see in the plaque on the dentition on teeth that there is, sorry, plaque in the dentition on teeth, that there's herbs within the plaque and the dentition on teeth, and that the herbs within the plaque and the dentition on people's teeth actually will associate with known herb usage for different pathologies that we see associated within the body as well. And that those herbs don't have a caloric intake, so they wouldn't be used for food, and that those herbs are bitter, so that they wouldn't be used for flavoring. And so we're definitely seeing these as an herbal use early on within Neanderthal. These are different medical things that we see within Neanderthal, that really show that medicine is quite a lot earlier than we thought it was, and quite a lot earlier than we tend to think of it as. I'm going to restart us. I think that I've been having problems with the algorithms. So I'm going to restart us, and I'm going to smoke really quick before I restart us, because TikTok's rules. So give me like 3 minutes and I'll be right back. I will still be over on YouTube. And I need to grab a drink or something. For some reason, I'm having a hard time. So I'll be back in like 5 minutes tops. I am still over here, YouTube. I can duck out of the way a little bit easier over here without it being so much of a problem when I'm smoking. And I think TikTok, the algorithm got messed up when I did the double, and so it's not as populous. I also have been having algorithm issues because I think that I'm shadow banned again, which is not going to be anything new. I mean, pretty sure I stay on shadow ban. Which then in turn amazes me at how much I actually get out considering. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Restarting everything up and see if it goes better. I know I've been having some shadow ban issues and I'm trying to make sure that I'm getting around them. Let the people that were in here back in. Give us a couple of minutes. We were just talking, hey, we were just talking about medicine with the Neanderthals, and we were just talking about seeing that there are different pathologies that we can see in the bones in a couple of Neanderthals, and we were just talking about seeing herbology within the teeth, within the dentition, the plaque and the dentition on teeth in different Neanderthals. So I want to make sure that before we go into it on food, because food in Neanderthal is what we're going to be talking about next. And I want to make sure that before we go, hi, Decray, into it on food, that I give chance to open up for anybody to ask questions about medicine within Neanderthals. We were talking about Shanidar 1 and La Chapelle 1. La Chapelle 1 is the image behind me. This is two different renditions of La Chapelle 1, one from the early 1900s and one from 2020-ish. And we were talking a bit about the skeletal morphology within him. And the skeletal morphology within Shanidar 1 that shows that these are both older individuals with extensive disease processes, disabilities that would have made it very difficult for them to get around without help from their communities. And several of these disease processes would have also required some medical assistance. With Shanidar 1, we see Shanidar 1 is Kreb from the Earth Children's series, you know alls. And we see a skeleton where the right forearm is missing. There was an injury to the head as a child, to the left side of the head, caused left side blindness. It was deaf. And that injury caused right side atrophy, paralysis. The right side to kind of have nerve damage, and it looks like they had to amputate his right forearm. There's also evidence of atrophy of the leg, and then evidence of fracturing in the foot on the left foot, and so the right foot, which is atrophied, right? This is all out through actual archaeology. I'm an archaeologist and an anthropologist. So we're seeing that there's absolutely medical care. And then we also see herbs within the dentition, the plaque and the dentition on their teeth. So the plaque within our teeth, actually, they can take that and isolate the isotopes within it and isolate the different structures within it and get different plants out of it. And the herbs that they found are herbs that they're finding alone in the layers, and also herbs that they're finding that have medicinal properties that we understand them still today as. Those medicinal properties often line up with different things that we see in the biology of the skeleton itself. And they are also not herbs that you would use for flavoring because they're very bitter, or herbs that you would use for caloric intake because they provide none. And so with that, we see definite use of herbology. You combine this with an amputation of a forearm and tending of fractured bones, right? Cauterizing, is that the word that you're asking, Freedom? When you combine that with amputation and care of fractures and care of elderly, there's also evidence of hip damage within La Chapelle one, the one behind me. Uh, we do not have evidence within Neanderthals of use of cauterizing. I would assume, right? I would assume with any open wound that is able to not bleed out, and any wound that you survive, that they're having a way to cut off that blood flow in some way, right? So while we don't have evidence, the evidence that the arm was amputated and he survived does mean that there's some evidence of cauterizing blood vessels, right? They would have had to do that to some level. Um, there's also no sign of infection within the bone, right? Which we understand from other remains also means that they likely use some antiseptic herbology, right? So, absolutely. Because something is 30% complete and found over a mile, what makes it fake? And why would one skeleton's fakeness make all other skeletons fake? Does evolution bother you? Hmm. These bones, I do believe that Neanderthal bones, to my knowledge, are of a slightly denser structure. Uh, this is due to Neanderthals themselves being of a slightly denser stature. Neanderthals being short and more stocky, um, and their musculature being heavier because of their environment would lead to need to have a denser bone structure to support the weight of that musculature, to support the attachments of that musculature. You're fine, Gong. Oh, thank you so much, Dylan. I always forget, and it started doing this recently, and I do not know how to fix that to where it stops doing it. But their DNA is still in modern humans. Herbology, as in this herb fixes this, and I'm going to drink a tea or eat this herb or inhale its smoke by putting it in the fire. That's what I mean. And that goes back, we know 31,000 years within us at least, right? We know that herbology goes back thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years within Homo sapien. There's no reason for us to not use it. Deer use it. Dogs use herbology. Sorry, but every time that your dog goes out and eats grass so that he can uh, throw up, so that he can fix the stomach stuff that's going on, that's your dog using the local herbs, right? In the same way that we use the local plants that we're supposed to be using, because, being part of a biome means that all of that plant life is really there to participate in that biome with us, right? Be that interwoven give and take balance that we're supposed to be a part of, right? Yeah, herbology is everywhere. Chimps, yep. Freedom, no, I don't think that. So I think that your idea of primitive is primitive. Uh, I prefer basil these days. because basil is more rooted in the things that are not necessarily just us, but more other Homo species um, as well, and earlier us, right? Roots, right? But uh, even by your standard and idea of that word, no, we're not talking about that type of a group of people. We're talking about a group of humans who were very comfortable, safe and secure for the most part. More safe and secure in their cave than you are in your home today because nobody could take their cave from them. There's nobody around to do it. And you could lose your home tomorrow, right? So, um, yeah, I can't just say I'm wrong. Gotta tell me why. Just saying. Um, no, thank you, Jocelyn. What do you mean by hazard models? You mean the idea that because there were predatory animals around, humans were too stupid to know how to avoid them and create safety? People live in jungles today, in hazardous environments today, in the same way that they've been living for tens of thousands of years. And they're able to avoid the hazards of the environment much better than any outsider coming in with all their technology is. Your idea of primitive is backwards. Your idea of primitive is backwards. They did suspend me for saying why race theory is debunked. They always suspend me for saying why race theory is debunked. You're right. Um, so the oldest that we have, okay, so I have an article that says that La Chapelle 1 was roughly 60. Today I'm reading an article in the Smithsonian that says 35. It's a rough estimate. Some people say 60, some people say 40, 35. Um, so yes, they could live much older than we tend to think. I can absolutely explain why race theory was debunked. And actually, this picture behind me is a really good example. So I am seeing that this is getting really blocky though. So we're going to go ahead and do this for a minute. I will turn these back on later. Um, but it gets trolly in here. I'll leave it on for or for subscribers for now, unless it gets to where it's distraction for me, even without it being trolly. So this is La Chapelle 1 behind me. Thank you, thank you. This is La Chapelle 1 behind me in two different views of La Chapelle 1. The view here is a modern view. Both of these are on the Widdaord.com site under this week. This modern view is a recreation based on what we currently know of Neanderthal. We have gathered so much information of Neanderthal over the last, God, I want to say even 10 years, right? Like 20 years, absolutely. But within the last 10 years, we have gathered this just wealth of information on Neanderthals. We've gone from believing that they couldn't talk and that they didn't have art to knowing that they could talk and knowing that they have art. And their first art is they're the first art in the world, right? Currently, though, who knows? A lot he might change all of that. We don't know yet. Um, and we've also gone in the last year into understanding that we were not the first people to bury our dead or to use fire in caves or to have this advanced brain, that this actually comes 235 to 335,000 years ago with Naledi in South Africa, or Naledi. So we've advanced our understanding of Neanderthal, and this is our new recreation based on our current modern understanding. This recreation over here is done when we see Neanderthal in 1908, when he was found in 1908, shortly thereafter. At this time, um, race itself as an idea starts when we see Europeans arrive in Turtle Island in 1492. Before this, there is othering, which is that idea that something is someone is wrong based on the idea that they're something else. That goes back roughly 10,000 years that we know of, um, maybe 20, with some newer things that I'm looking at, but not very far. And this is uh, the barbarians in the hills are going to get you. You got to feed my army so that I can protect you. And it goes to that other nation state is going to get you. So you got to feed my army to protect you. And then it goes to that other religion is sinful. So you have to feed my army to protect you. Then it goes to we found this other country and we want to give you land. So you need to feed my army to give you that land. And the doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny states that this is our land because God gave it to us, even though there are millions of people living on it. We're just going to slaughter them to take it, right? So, as Europeans are discovering science, which Turtle Island itself has, Turtle Island is North America, and which Africa itself already has, as they're stealing slaves from Africa, stealing humans from Africa. um, we see that Europeans double down on this idea of there being races, there being different groups of people that God chose and God didn't choose. In the 1850s, um, we see all of these ideas of evolution really coming into play. And our idea that God created us 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago is really starting to shift out. This really comes about when we see Darwin's theory of evolution arriving at the same time of our first Neanderthal, which we believe is morphologically a human. We think it's just a human because we're 6,000 years old, but we think that this human is a diseased human, and that's what all of these different things are within his skull. When we take this idea and we realize that this is a different species, we decide to double down. If God didn't give us manifest destiny and doctrine of discovery to go out and kill a bunch of people, then what right do we have to go out and kill a bunch of people? Is this Western thought, European mindset that uses these finds to double down on the idea that these groups are lesser and race theory is developed. Race theory is developed as a justification for the atrocity that they're committing, and that they are continuing to this day in many spaces, including Turtle Island, to commit. And in this doubling down, they take that first Neanderthal and we take early Neanderthals and create this idea that Neanderthal is primitive, hunched, jutting face, receding jaw and forehead, and dark of skin and hairy. And in this, they're trying to equate Africans and Neanderthals and equate the idea that Africans are closer to Neanderthals and therefore more primitive. In this, they create the idea that anything having darker skin, which includes vast majority of groups, the vast majority of cultures and ethnicities across the globe, though there are non-European cultures and ethnicities that are not dark of skin. Many Asian countries are not dark of skin. Um, so, in taking this, many Turtle Island cultures are not dark of skin pre-colonization. In taking this, we see this doubling down that anything that's not European is lesser. And it takes it from it being chosen by God to be lesser, marked by God as the child of Cain, Ham, the child of Cain. Taken from that into the idea that it is primitive and it is subhuman on some level to have darker of skin. And I say on some level because even as I say it, it's hard for me to speak these words out loud. I would like to remind everybody this is educational content. Um, but the Europeans need justification to state that these groups of human beings are somehow less human, subhuman compared to others. And they use Neanderthal to do it. Um, as we have come along, we have debunked the theory of race. In early race theory, using primitive thought process of like Neanderthals being primitive, because that is a primitive thought process, a truly primitive thought process backwards as it can get. In using that, they also start to decide that it is in having Neanderthal characteristics um, that somebody is. This is where they decide, and this doesn't even have to be skin color at this point. Okay. This is where we get into eugenics really heavily. We see that they find anybody with brow ridges to be brutish and heavy brow ridges, like the you see those people who have really thick, heavy, bulging brow ridges. They decide that this has to do with Neanderthals and that this must have something to do with being criminal. And they actually start rounding people up and deciding people are criminal based on their facial morphology. If your mid face is jutting out, if your chin is angled back, if you don't have a heavy highbrow, this is where this phrase highbrow comes from, right? You don't have a high forehead, right? And if you have a heavy or jutting brow ridge, right? And so we see that this not only is a racist thing, but it's also that eugenics ideas. So not only are we looking at this as ethnic, but we're looking at this as eugenic. Okay. And so they really double down on this. And in their science that they've appropriated and fucked with, and that, is lost in and of itself, in their science, they use calipers and shade charts. And this is how they define what race is. Um, they never go any deeper. When we can start to look at genetics and start to look at DNA, we have something called the whole genome or the World Genome Project that happens that takes all the genomics around the world. We've also been able to look at archaeological sites, so pre-contact, so pre-colonialized sites, right? And then looking and combining all of this stuff, what we are seeing is, excuse me, I've got a hair in my mouth, that there is more genetic diversity primary within primary populations than there are between primary populations. Now, I want you to think about this for just a hot second, because when you do, it makes perfect sense. More genetic diversity is what is needed to be able to breed, to have babies without getting inbred, right? You have to have a high gene diversity to be able to be with each other so that you're not inbred, right? So, this higher genetic diversity within populations makes sense for species continuance. Okay. But what we also see is that you're more likely to be more genetically diverse from your next door neighbor than you are to be genetically diverse from somebody clear across the planet. Clear across the planet. And this doesn't mean that, you might not have black skin here and white skin here. What it means is that this is one tiny little piece of billions of pieces. And those billions of pieces are more likely to be more genetically diverse within your population than between populations. You are more alike genetically with somebody clear across the globe than you are with your next door neighbor. So this tells us that race, as something that tells us what your genes, as in intelligence, pain levels, athletic abilities, um, manners, language, all of these things have to do with your genes. The thought process that is defined by space and rather or instead of by family lines, right? And family lines don't have anything to do with race. Mitochondrial DNA has nothing to do with culture, with different ethnicities, right? We see mitochondrial DNAs in different spaces. So when we look at this, we see race in itself does not exist. The idea that your location on the planet dictates things that have nothing to do with the biome itself, things that are innate to all humanity, is a fallacy. You can tell this when you look at places like Africa in itself. Pre colonization, you find every color, every hair, every eye color, every height, every body style, all of it available in Homo sapien in Africa in finds pre colonization. So if we decide that African is an ethnicity or a heritage or a race based on this vast continent that includes every single human genetic ability, then what does it say? Every single person on this planet has a genetic match in somebody in Africa. And all the genes of all the human beings, like the whole genetic genome that we see, diverse genome of humans, all the genes are in the Khoisan people of Africa. And this is how we know that they're the original population of all humans. So this is how race theory is debunked. And this is how Neanderthal and early archaeology and anthropology absolutely used their finds and their racism and their privilege, I think is the only word I can even use for it. Or maybe egotism is a little bit better to use this to justify their atrocity, right? Um, and I always like to tell you how race theory was debunked. I always like to tell you that we find all the genetic diversity within Africa in the Khoisan population, right? All the genomes that you can find in Homo sapiens sapien. All the genomes that you can find in Homo sapiens sapien are within the Khoisan population of Africa. So we're all African at our heart. Do not steal other people's culture, though. If you're not a part of a culture, you are not a part of a culture. Do not steal culture. That would be news to me, subtle. Um, it might phrase in a different way. I might be phrasing it wrong, rather. So we can find all the genes of the human genome within the Khoisan population. That might not equate to being the most genetically diverse. I have equated it to being the most genetically diverse, but I do know that it is that fact in and of itself that we can find all the genes of the human of sapien, all the possible combinations of genes of Homo sapiens or all the possible genes of Homo sapiens genome within the Khoisan population, because I do know that that's how they've been able to trace our origin back to them. But like I said, I could be wording that part wrong. Because that's how it relates it to my head, but that doesn't mean that that's how they scientifically word it, right? Like it might word scientifically different, and that phrasing might scientifically uh, work better for that Russian population, right? So, um, okay, let's go ahead. Let me go ahead and open up for that because that question being answered, I want to make sure before I go on to the next, and we'll go into food in Neanderthal next. I want to make sure everybody else understood too. I know that people are smart, but I also want to make sure that I'm saying things in a way that are understandable. Khoisan, Khosan, San. Khoisan. And that one, you want to take it into Google Scholar to search. And what you want to search is genetic diversity. And I would search genetic diversity. Thank you, Santana. Thank you, Bob. Um, I have an article and it is on the link tree, which I think is still up, but I haven't been able to access it myself. Let me look and see if I can see it. When we've talked before about finding Neanderthal DNA all over Africa pre-contact, um, the article that's a part of actually goes into it. That's not the right one, but that goes into the other one. Okay. Trying to see if I can pull up the site because I haven't transferred everything over. I need to, and I just haven't been functioning very well. I don't know if I would agree that culture is shared, not owned. Um, I would think that many cultures don't have a concept of ownership, but I would also think that many cultures believe that you should be a part of culture to practice culture, and that anything that is practice of culture that is not a part of culture is dishonoring culture. Not anything, but maybe a vast majority of things, and definitely anything that practices in a way that doesn't hold truth, right? I do think that there are a lot of things that we name as cultural appropriation today that are not cultural appropriation. Um, that said, I think that there are a lot of things that are appropriated today that should not be. I have degrees, Dylan. I choose not to work within the field here in the United States where I am. And I personally have medical issues that mean that I cannot work for another person currently due to military issues. And I also have medical issues due to military issues that mean that I physically can't dig. So I do research and compile and write. And all of them are defined by the culture, right? Like, so there are many cultures out there that don't care. Don't care. Do whatever you want, right? And then there are many cultures out there who don't care as long as you're not being shitty or costing others, right? And then there are many cultures out there who are like, I don't care as long as you're not stealing things that are very, very honorable, right? Don't do the stolen valor purple heart shit. And then there are cultures out there who are like, don't fucking touch our shit, right? And I think that, um, it really has to be defined by the culture. No one else can define it for them. But if things go back to Neanderthal, then they are cross cultural, right? Um, and many things that are defined as being specific to singular cultures are not specific to singular cultures. Patterns are specific to singular culture. Imagery is specific to singular culture. Um, Tattooing is not. Um, Braiding your hair is not. Uh, but patterns are, right? Uh, Placements of specific patterns are, especially, right? Feathers are cross cultural. War bonnets are not. Uh, Specific feather hair wear in specific groups that is pattern specific that has a spiritual connotation to it would not be. Because I am sure there are others out there that I do not know of, right? Um, so I think that it really just goes, again, it's just really defined by the culture. And again, pattern, not decoration of body, not decoration of self, not identifying by animals, not identifying by natural surroundings, um, not uh, how we choose to fix our body so that we can function. Braiding your hair is the earliest thing we probably did. It's not easy to tie your hair back in a ponytail and get it to stay. If you take a strap of leather and tie your hair into a ponytail, unless your hair is extremely curly, really, it's not going to stay. It's going to slip. You actually have to braid your hair and braid that strip of leather into your hair and then tie it off down at the bottom to get the leather to stay in, right? So we're actually going to see that braiding really goes back. The Venus of Wollendorf displays braids in her hair. This is Austrian. She's African in feature, right? Her phenotype is what we would consider African at the time or at this time, right? So she probably had 4C hair or, some, 3 or 4 level of hair, right? So does that mean that Austrians can't braid their hair that way because they don't look the same today, even though that's their ancestor? Does that mean that a group clear on the other side of the globe can braid their hair this way and they're the only group that can braid their hair this way because they look like they looked? Not because they have any attachment, not because they have any culture that's shared, not because they have any familial connection or ancestral link, but because they appear the same way, right? You have to take a look at it at a few different levels. But if anything is currently a part of a culture practice today, um, and they lay claim to a pattern uh, that is distinctly and only theirs, right? Like as something that you can see that, then yes, you have to follow that. Well, and I don't want to get into the braided hair debate. I've kind of specifically avoided that, right? Um, I don't want to get into the appropriation debate. Uh, I will talk about close practices, right? But well, I know that some things are not cultural appropriation that we call cultural appropriation. I still also know that if you give some people a stick, they'll take a whole fucking tree. And I'm not about to give some basic thoughts a stick so they can take a whole fucking tree out of it, right? So I'm not about to get into the cultural appropriation debate 'cause I'm not about to give somebody a stick and have them take a tree. Common ancestor came from, Bugnar, you mean like, our common ancestor with, so I don't know the original common ancestor of all beings. We have one. I don't know what it is. Um, I don't think they've found it, they just know that we have it. Um, our common ancestor with Neanderthal is probably Heidelbergensis, Homo erectus heidelbergensis. Um, and same with Denisovian, and same with the 5 other species that we know we mixed with, but not so much with ones that we don't know. We might have a different common ancestor, but likely with in the erectus tree. Thank you, Phil. The topic right now is actually Neanderthals, though I have gotten a little bit off topic because I was asked a couple questions, and I'm also, you know, in answering questions. But we were talking about medicine in Neanderthals, and now we're talking about food in Neanderthals next, um, which we can absolutely just go into. But there's been a few new finds that are really cool that have been seen. And one of them that really stuck out to me. So Shanidar one is Krebs, right? Shanidar Cave is where they get the idea for the Earth Children series, where GNM all gets it, and where it tracks along for quite some time. Uh, they have recently started excavating Shanidar Cave again. And in the new excavations of Shanidar Cave, they're finding a lot of stuff. One of these things that they found is actually evidence of flatbread made with grains and legumes being like lentils and stuff like that. And they're also finding, and I believe it's actually within this bread is made from leftovers, right? So they're actually showing keeping of leftovers and cooking it again, right? Um, and we see with many different things that the Neanderthals actually have this wide variety of food intake. We're seeing that there are certain groups of Neanderthal that are carnivorous. We see that there's many different food distinctions. We have certain groups that are more carnivorous and certain groups that are more herbivoric. This appears to have something to do with the environment that they're in. Certain groups have more access to meat and certain groups have less access to meat. Um, though it seems in the carnivorous group that there's less of an access to plants than there is to meat. We see in groups that have share access to both that there is an omnivoric diet. Thank you. 15 to 50% means you have more of Neanderthal DNA than that population of society. It doesn't mean that you have that much Neanderthal DNA. Uh, the most Neanderthal DNA that anybody has by percentage is about 5%. Um, so, with that difference in food environment, you're going to see that you're going to adapt, right? If there's a lot more meat, I'm going to eat more meat. If there's a lot more veggies, I'm going to eat more veggies. If there is more of a environment that gives me seafood, I'm going to eat more seafood, right? We're also seeing within the Neanderthals that there is evidence of using raptors not only in their jewelry, they apparently were, it looks like in some form, taming golden eagles to actually hunt alongside them, possibly. But they were also using golden eagles as talons, as jewelry, their talons and their feathers as jewelry. But that hunting would have given them a wider variety of food as well. We see that within their food variety, where we're not seeing complex hearths, which we do see with Nalati. Uh, so far, we do not see a complex hearth. like Naladi's, which was kind of like an oven almost. We are seeing that there is a variety of ability to make different things and use of grains, use of different beans, legumes, different products that we might not think of being usable. They were boiling and soaking and pounding different things to get them to the state that they were edible. I have no clue on that one, but maybe. So I know that there is documentation. They've recently gone further back though, and I don't know what the new one is. There was a documentation of something the size of a squirrel that looked like a shrew in the Jurassic period. But they've recently gone further back than that. They actually find that mammals, that's not a primate, that's a mammal. They've recently found that mammals split from our last common ancestors before lizards started developing, so that they no longer believe that we developed after or from lizards. So the lizard brain idea is not real. Um, but the oldest primate, I don't know about the oldest primate. I don't know about the oldest primate. I know about the oldest mammals. And I can tell you of the first hominin, and I can tell you of so the first hominin that we have currently that we know for certain is Sahelanthropus tadici in Chad in Africa, uh, and this is upright walking. Um, and we have evidence of upright walking at 6.9 to 7 million years ago in Crete, footprints in a find. And then we also have evidence of a what we think might be the missing link at 7.2 million years ago in Greece. And this is Graciopithecus freibergi. And this is just a jawbone. And the reason that we think it's the missing link between us and chimpanzees, or one of, there are many missing links between us and chimpanzees, is it shows chimp-like features, or basal features between both of us. But it also shows the derived feature within hominins, which is or hominini, the back of our species, the first of our species, which is the way the molars converge, the roots of the molars converge. Um, and so it shows that it's probably both of those. The poverty point isn't that far back though, so it's got to be something new because poverty point is only a few thousand years. Unless they redated it, can't be that. I'll look. I'll look pretty. Um, Man has been here for a long time. Homo sapiens specifically for 300,000 years. Thank you, Ducray. I do very specifically focus on human, so Homo species. So I actually am not great at the other ones. Like I can kind of give you little bits and pieces, and really only of ones within our direct genetic tree, right? Like anything else in the animal taxonomy, I'm like, yeah, I know it's there. I know little cool like facts, like that trees can talk to each other and they belong to matriarchal clans inside of huge forest nations, right? Like I know little facts and stuff like that, but like the in-depth stuff is a little bit less than that. The scientific stuff is a little bit less than that. I think everybody really thinks that with Ancestry and 23andMe, so that's not your mistake. I think they try and make people think that, like, I think it types it in that way. It looks stupid when you look at it. Yeah, poverty point isn't that old, but I know we have different stuff. I'm gonna go and look and see what that is, because I haven't seen that, and that would be a totally new thing, and I wanna look. Because that would also be the other stuff that we've been talking about too. I think that it depends on your technic vision. So, I think, and I was talking about this one earlier, because this was asked earlier, actually. Yes, but I don't believe that they needed to make technology in the same way you do. We try and make things um, without thinking about the world around us. And so we exploit the world around us instead of working in concert with us. There's lots of technological stuff out there that works in concert with the earth. And when you stop using it, it goes back into the earth and it becomes a part of the biome again. So it's not something you see in records, right? It fades out because it's meant to, right? I think that older cultures used their technology in ways so that it could fade out because they didn't feel the need to leave an indelible permanent marker for the size of their obelisk, right? Um, so yes, absolutely. I think we've had advanced cities before. I think we've had advanced cultures before. I think that none of these cultures are the master advanced culture that gave that culture to everybody else that people want to talk about. But I do believe that around the globe that we have been what we would consider advanced. Yes, Egypt absolutely built all that, and that's what I mean. Like we absolutely have. I personally believe that ancient civilizations are actually uh, stabler, that people had more safety and stability within them. I believe Neanderthals have more safety and stability than we do. And to me, that's advanced technology. Uh, Phones and things like that, the ability to do different things, absolutely some form of that. But I also don't think that they needed to do this. I think that this is a different need that comes from, um, that need to kind of exploit, right? And it is very real how aliens built the pyramid because that is actually a very racist foundational thought anyways, right? Like, brown people could not have possibly done it because Europeans couldn't have possibly done it. Yeah, and I do believe, like, so when we talked about Neanderthals last week, when we were talking about art and jewelry, and we were talking about, the end of the long hunt, sitting there around your fire in your brilliantly colored cave that's got light reflecting across the wall, and you feel like you're a part of the earth because there's this almost heartbeat rhythm that you're feeling involved in this, right? And you're eating this beautiful fresh meat that tastes perfection because it's this fresh kill anyways, and you know how to roast it right, and it's on fire. And we all know meat cooked over an open fire tastes better than anything on the fucking planet anyways, right? We all know that that is the pinnacle of eating it anyways, right? You've got the right herbal knowledge that your meat tastes really good with those herbs too, right? Somebody's gathered berries, you've got dessert, you understand how to, you might even have cake with cherries on it, right? And as you're sitting around this fire and you're talking with your family and your band and your group of several people who have all been working in concert and had fun working together all day long, and really didn't work all day long, like a few hours out of the day for each of them, right? And have been able to sit around and bullshit and joke for the rest of it. And now you're sitting in this extremely warm, extremely beautiful, well, not extremely too warm, but warm, safe, secure environment. Animals don't come into a cave that's lit by a fire. Animals run from fire, so you're safe. Plus, you've probably put some form of form through the door, right? Like you're covering this bitch up. You're safe. You're safer now then than you are now. You can live 300 years in that. You can live 10 generations in that and be safe. And living 10 generations in that, you get way more safety than anybody feels today. Everybody knows that they can take your house tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you rent or you own. Everybody knows it. You don't have to be on a reservation to know that. You don't have to be in a space of high poverty to know that. They wrote fucking laws called eminent domain where they can yank your fucking land from your feet, even it's been in your family 100, well, not 100 generations here, but 10 generations. Sorry, let me make sure my numbers on that correct. It's only 8 generations of Europeans within Turtle Island and that concept. So, even if it's been in your family 8 generations since the pilgrims arrived, right? They can yank it out from underneath your feet because of eminent domain. Governments don't make us safer. They remove our safety. The state doesn't make us safer. That's not safety. That's safer. When you can be somewhere for 300 years, your family has been in that space for 300 years. You have not had to fight for it. You have not had to, there's people nearby maybe that you enjoy, right? But should it be anyways? None of it belongs to anybody anyways, right? It's all taken from groups anyways that are still here, that still exist, that still wish that they had their own homes, right? That are still willing to share those homes. They just wish that people would stop telling them how to live on it, right? So, um, but there's no safety, not by the state that rips it out from everybody, and state that ripped it out from them. So it does. And it should be absolutely all of ours. I'm gonna go. I will be back Friday morning at 10 a.m., not 8 a.m. And we'll see if maybe I can go like into the afternoon. Sometimes those are pretty good. I don't think we'll talk about Neanderthals. I think I want to stop talking about paleoanthropology for a minute. So we'll probably be on some other topics. We might use this picture though. Um, so I will be back though. Friday morning at 10 a.m. I'm going to leave this live and go ahead and put that up on the site. And hopefully I'll have some other stuff transferred over. Oh, I am so sorry, Subtle. What was it that you were looking for, love? Oh, okay. Okay. We'll talk about it there then. I will see all of you guys. All of the stuff from tonight is all on the Widda Ord site under this week. Good night, everybody. Have a great one. Good night, YouTube. Have a great one.